Well, I'm delighted to see you all here. I want to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. The name on my birth certificate is Francis Enoch Myers. My business associates call me F.E. My friends call me Frank. Feel free to call me Frank. I was born actually about 6 or 7 miles east of here in the village of Rouseburg. My parents were George and Elizabeth Myers. They had only arrived here a few years earlier from central Pennsylvania, not too far from the location of Pennsylvania State University today. Anyway, I was born in 1847, the oldest of 9 children. And my father, in addition to operating a prosperous farm, had a lucrative business making wagons. He had a partnership with his neighbor from about a mile farther west. His name was John Studebaker. Mr. Studebaker would fashion the wooden parts for the wagons, and my father operated a forge and made the metal parts. If you aren't familiar with the name Studebaker, his 5 sons went on to found a very successful automobile business in the early 20th century. Well, by the time I reached adulthood, I recently read a biography that said there wasn't enough work for me to do at the farm, which always makes me laugh a little bit. I spent my whole childhood on a farm. I know there's always plenty to do on a farm. It wasn't as though there wasn't enough work, it's just I didn't want to do it. I felt as though I was bound for different things. One thing they always said about me is I could talk, I could sell ice to the Eskimos. So I took a job in Ashland. Now Ashland, this was in 1870 or so. Ashland was a town of only about 2,600 residents. So look, it only had been founded about 50 years earlier. There was not a foot of paved road in the entire town. But compared to Rouseburg, it looked pretty cosmopolitan. So I headed to Rouseburg, and I quickly found a position with Mr. Melvin Parmalee, who operated a dry goods store. He hired me for the princely sum of $2 a week. Now that included room and board. Room was a cot set up in the back of the store. Board was meals at the McNulty House, which was Ashland's finest hotel at the time. Today it's no longer the home of Gilbert's Furniture, but that's the building where it was. I didn't spend much time working for Mr. Parmalee, less than a year before I found something that I considered better, because I made the acquaintance of a Mr. M.C. Goucher, who operated a farm equipment company, and he was looking for a traveling salesman. And I thought this job was right up my alley. I was able to take my sturdy horse Bill all over the area with a wagon load of sample farm tools that I could show to potential clients. Now I had an advantage here. After all, I had spent my entire life on a farm, so I had some sense of what farmers needed and what they wanted. And of course, I had a certain natural sales technique. So it wasn't long before I was doing quite well for myself, so much so that by 1872, I felt as though I was in a position to marry a young lady that I had been courting. Her name was Alavesta Hohenschel, and her father operated a hardware store in Rouseburg. We originally set up a household in Rouseburg, and very quickly we began having children. Mary Estelle was born later in 1872. Soon after her, Charles was born. Unfortunately, Charles did not survive past infancy. And then in April of 1875, Alavesta had another son whom we named George J. Myers. Now, Jay had only just been born when M.C. Goucher went bankrupt, and this posed a certain problem for me. However, I had managed to squirrel away a certain sum of money. Plus, by this time, I had developed quite a clientele, so I decided that I was going to go into business for myself and established a farm equipment store on Center Street in Ashland. But one particular product sold very well, a line of plows by a company based in Canton called Bucher and Gibbs. And Bucher and Gibbs apparently was so happy with my ability to sell their plows that they offered me a job as a traveling salesman for them. Well, this posed a problem, obviously, since I had a store. Well, it occurred to me, I've got a younger brother named Philip, who I had reason to believe was also interested in leaving the farm. So I hired Philip for $20 a month to take care of the store while I drove around the countryside selling plows for Boucher and Gibbs, or Bucher and Gibbs, I should say. By the late 1870s, my various business ventures were doing quite well. And in fact, the family was growing. Alavesta presented me with another son, John Clement, and then 2 daughters followed soon after that, Catherine and Helen. Well, between that and the growing prosperity of my business, I decided that it was time to move to Ashland. So we had a house built on the top of the hill on Center Street, and moved into that. By this time, I should add, not only was the store doing well under Philip's management, but I was the top salesman for Bucher and Gibbs. So much so that they presented me with a plow, right, in recognition of my sales success. This is not the original plow, but a very, very convincing replica. I was also, I should add, a leading shareholder in the company. So things were going quite well, but big things, much bigger things were in the works, because Philip was working on something he called a double action force pump. He'll be able to tell you a lot more about that. All I know was I saw opportunity. In 1879, he'd been working on this for years, of course, but he perfected it and patented it in 1879. He and I then took it to the Ohio State Fair, where we took a first prize ribbon, and I knew we had a good thing. So we set up a workshop, a 50 by 73 foot space in the basement of a building on Center Street. And this was a place where PA could work on his pumps. Well, in 1884, by 1884, we had sold so many pumps, I decided it was time to part company with Bucher and Gibbs so that I could give my entire focus to this new company, F.E. Myers and Brother. PA soon secured patents for a number of other pumps and pieces of farm equipment, and in 1885 we opened our first full-fledged factory just north of town by the railroad tracks. And between 1885 and 1891, right, a mere 6 years, demand for those pumps was so great that we had to expand our facilities no fewer than 13 times. 2 younger brothers joined us in the operation, Alvin Newton and George Denton, so it really was F.E. Myers and Brothers. But PA and I were really the ones that were the guiding force behind it, and we made a natural team. I was the one who kept the books, I was the one who traveled around selling the product. Meanwhile, PA stayed back, he ran the factory floor and developed new products. By early 1896, the Myers factory complex had expanded to the point where it occupied 100,000 square feet, and it had more than 200 employees, making it the largest employer in Ashland. The firm produced by this time more than 20 different kinds of pumps, along with all sorts of different kinds of farm equipment. And all these items were marketed in a 100-page catalog that was circulated throughout the United States and indeed to every corner of the civilized world. Well, as a sign of the great success of F.E. Myers and Brothers, in 1897 I presented my wife with a unique present for our 25th wedding anniversary. It was a house, not just a house. One of the local newspapers called it a palace, and I'd say that estimate was not far off. Located on the corner of College Avenue and Center Street, it was a grand stone affair with glass-paneled doors and mirrored walls and inlaid floors, frescoed ceilings, and every window to the outside had a red and white striped awning on the top. It became the center of social life in Ashland, Ohio, as well as a great meeting place for business purposes. Every year, all the salespeople in the country and those from abroad who could make it would converge on Ashland for a week-long Myers sales school, where we would go over all the new products with them and make sure they understood all the specifications and gave them pointers on how to best sell these products. And the highlight of the Myers sales school was always a grand banquet at the mansion, at our home on Center and College Street. Well, it wasn't just in the farm equipment business that I focused. I got involved in the railroad business, although again, it was with the goal of improving business for F.E. Myers and Brothers. You see, to the extent that Ashland had more railroad connections to the rest of the world, that obviously made it easier for us to sell our products. My first venture was the Ashland and Worcester Railroad, a 21-mile length of track that connected our local railroad with the Pennsylvania. And then some years later, I became president of the Cleveland and Southwestern. This was a much larger venture, 216 miles of track connecting Cleveland with Columbus. It was such a wonderful mode of transport because you could board that train in downtown Ashland and be in Public Square in Cleveland in a mere 3 hours. Lightning fast. And that part of the track, of course, ran right down Main Street in Ashland. It's often referred to today as the interurban. Now, as president of the Cleveland and Southwestern, I was given a rail car, private rail car, quite a perk of the office, I'd say. And I decided I was going to name it after my beloved wife, Alavesta. Unfortunately, when it arrived, there was a misspelling of the name on the outside. It was painted Alvesta. And I wanted to raise Cain, but Alvesta wouldn't hear of it and said, no, we're just going to call it that. So from that moment on, the train car, but not my wife, was called Alvesta. God was very good to me, but I don't want to give you the impression that I lived a charmed life either. We had our share of certainly professional setbacks. Our woodworking factory burned not once but twice, costing tens of thousands of dollars, which is of course much more in today's money. But far, far worse than that were the personal tragedies we faced. Of the 3 children that Alavesta and I had, the 6 children rather that Alavesta and I had, 3 of them died. I already mentioned Charles, who didn't get beyond infancy. And then my son Jay was only 39 years old when he sat out at a ball game, out in the rain, could have told him otherwise, contracted a bad cold that turned into pneumonia, so he didn't make it to his 40th birthday. But the most tragic loss of all was my daughter, Catherine. Everybody loved Catherine. She was such a delight. Well, she was 24 years of age when she and her sisters and her mother went on a trip to Italy. They took a cruise across the Atlantic and traveled all through it. Well, no sooner had they gotten there, but Catherine started complaining about not feeling well, feeling tired, and her condition would get worse and then get better. And then, of course, I'm on this side of the Atlantic tending to business affairs, and I'm only following this by way of the letters that were sent home. Eventually we got the bad news that she had passed of typhoid fever. Making matters even worse was the fact that, of course, we wanted to bring her home for a proper burial, but the local authorities had qualms about releasing a body that had typhoid fever. And we had to deal with all sorts of red tape. And finally, we managed to smuggle her back in a box marked statuary. So she was brought back across the Atlantic in that box, and of course we were able to give her the burial that she deserved. Well, F.E. Myers and Brothers continued to do very well throughout this period. Those of you who've studied your American history might have heard of the Panic of 1907, which was a massive setback on Wall Street. A lot of fortunes were lost in 1907. F.E. Myers did not lay off a single employee in that crisis, nor did it close for a single day. Arguably, this was the golden age of the American farmer, a time when farmers had more disposable income than ever. This was the great age of the Sears Roebuck catalog and the Montgomery Ward catalog. And those catalogs, of course, carried our line of products. Plus, we had our own catalog out there. Sales were going very well. Farmers were getting excellent prices for their product. And in fact, new products joined the pumps and the hay-moving equipment in the Myers catalog. Door hangers and bicycle racks and wooden swings and store ladders, knapsack sprayers. Right? If you get a chance, you might look at the sprayers over in this side of the room. Our knapsack sprayers found their way down to the Panama Canal zone, right, where the Panama Canal was being built to deal with the deadly threat of mosquitoes carrying yellow fever. Well, 2 of my sons, Jay and John, both became involved in the company business. Of course, I already mentioned Jay's sad end. John turned out to have quite a bit of business acumen. He was a graduate of Harvard in 1902 and came to work for us immediately afterward. And we first put him to work in the advertising department. And it was John who came up with our memorable sales campaign, "Take your hat off to the Myers," right? With an image of a man's hat being knocked off. Of course, today that message may be lost on many of you, but the fact was the stream of water from a Myers pump, even at some distance, was strong enough to knock a hat off a man's head. Believe me, people understood the significance of that slogan, and it helped a great deal with our sales. By 1911, we had a workforce of 650 men, producing more than 175,000 pumps every year, sold via a network of some 30,000 dealers worldwide. 5 years later, F.E. Myers and Brothers became one of the first companies in the country, certainly in the area, to offer life insurance and medical insurance to its employees. Up to $500 of life insurance, up to $1,000 of medical coverage each year. Well, when the United States entered the Great War in 1917, we switched over production from pumps and hay tools to shells for artillery. I and my brother and other managers of the business took the lead in selling selling victory bonds to help support the war effort. In fact, Ashland, thanks, I must say in all modesty, to our efforts, Ashland became the first county in Ohio to reach its quota, and only the third county in the United States to surpass its quota. Well, in the summer of 1921, PA and I converted our long-standing partnership into a formal limited liability corporation. It was valued at $6 million. Now, to put that in perspective, in dollars today, that's $84 million. So it was quite a large concern. By this time, our factories covered 12 acres. We were churning out 2 pumps every minute of every day. That made us the largest manufacturer of pumps in the world. Of course, it was churning out the other stuff as well: pump cylinders, hay tools, door hangers, etc., etc. Well, the incorporation documents listed me as the president of the corporation. PA was first vice president. My son John was second vice president, and PA's son Guy was third vice president. But just about a year after we signed that paperwork, I became seriously ill. Now, Alavesta died in March of 1923, and my condition deteriorated considerably after that. I joined her in death on December 2nd, 1923, at the age of 76. I'm very proud to leave behind a legacy in the form of a great corporation and then a lovely family. So I'm going to introduce my younger brother, PA, who can tell you about some more aspects of the company. Thank you very much.